All right, Colts Nation, here we are again. Finally, game day. Well, I guess technically the game before game day, but we finally get to talk about some football again, right? I mean, hopefully Thanksgiving went well for you. Hopefully you ate your stuffing. Absolutely, bar none, by the way, the best side on Thanksgiving. If you say anything other than the stuffing, you're absolutely lying to yourself. But that's neither here nor there, right? Tomorrow, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers off the bye week. Now, this game right here is where the season officially starts. Now, I know we've played 10 games, and I know technically we've been going through the season, but this is the push right here. This is where we're going to find out who all of these teams really are. And if you ask me, this game against the Buccaneers is all about perseverance, and it's all about fighting through adversity. How is this team going to respond to Shaq Leonard being cut? Now, I know in terms of his on-the-field play, in theory, he didn't really move the needle much. It's not like the presence of Shaq Leonard on the field is going to make a big difference one way or another for this defense, if you ask me. But the potential ramifications of cutting a player like that, what he means to the city, what he means to this locker room, and what he's meant as a leader to this organization and this franchise, you cannot minimize the possibility of that. What we can hope is that this team rises up from that and becomes better, and it's a unifying moment as opposed to one that kind of splits the locker room a little bit. I do have a feeling that the Colts are going to respond just fine to this game because of the way they've handled adversity throughout the course of the offseason and the season. Obviously, the Jonathan Taylor thing happened, right? Anthony Richardson, etc., etc. We've dealt with so much adversity, and we have found multiple different ways to win games, whether we had to score a bunch of points, whether the defense had to step up and we had to win some of those old school type of looking games, right? 10-6 comes to mind. Even that game earlier in the season against the Ravens went to overtime at 19-19. That was a gritty game. That is a game that I thought really showed the character of this football team. The Colts, I think, will be just fine without Shaquille Leonard. And there are just so many games going on this week that are important to the AFC playoff picture, right? Of course, we play, but we have the Jags at 7-3 versus the Houston Texans at 6-4. That is a game that we have to root for the Jaguars. If the Texans end up winning that game, that all but assures that both of these teams are going to find their way into it, right? The Broncos at 5-5 are versing the Browns at 6-4. The Broncos are rolling right now, but we do have to root for the Browns with a backup quarterback. The more backup quarterbacks win, the better. I guess teams could be saying things like that about us, but it just goes to show the state of the NFL right now. Steelers, 6-4. Bengals, 5-5. Again, I'm rooting for the Bengals. They got no shot without Joe Burrow, the same way people would say we have no shot without Anthony Richardson. But at the same time, people said we had no shot with Anthony Richardson. So what the hell is the difference, right? Now, I could sit here like a dork and talk about, oh, well, if this happens and this amount of points are scored in this game and blah, 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 right? I could talk about all the different variables for playoff implications and how each game individually affects the Colts and what they need to happen to get there. But at this point in the season, right, in week 17 and 18, we could talk about that all day. At this point in the season, there is nothing more important than just going out and winning football games. And you look at the Colts schedule, let me just filibuster while I bring it up, right? If we keep winning games against the teams that we have in front of us, the math will work out if we keep winning, right? Obviously starting this week, but then we have the Titans, the Bengals who were in the playoff picture in the AFC, the Steelers who were in the playoff picture in the AFC, and then the Falcons, and then the Raiders, and then when we end the season against the Texans. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games. 3 of them are against teams that we are battling for a playoff spot. So forget all the nonsense. Forget all the things we can't control. What we can control is how we show up on Sunday. And when I say we, I don't mean we, the fans, because we just sit on the couch with a beer and watch. I'm talking about the boys out there in blue, right? The boys in blue. Some would refer to those as the Cops. I'm referring to the Colts as the boys in blue. They're the guys, ultimately, that control whether or not they make the playoffs. Not all the outside noise. There's no reason to talk about it. And this week versus the Bucs is a game that is much different for the Indianapolis Colts than the last two were. And it's not just because of the implications, but it's because of the actual test that we have in front of us. Whoops, and I'm going to explain all of that today and more as per usual. But before we get into it, you know what time it is. I got to introduce myself. My name is Justin, and this right here is the Riding the Bench Colts cast. As always, I ask anyone who is enjoying this video, please go ahead and shoot it a like. It is going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Ultimately, the goal is to become the biggest, the best Colts podcast on planet Earth. I still have plenty of work to do. We have not even hit 1,800 subscribers yet, let alone 2,000. So if you want to hit a subscribe, help me get to that. That would be greatly appreciated. But most importantly, let's just enjoy the video and talk some Colts football, right? So I'm going to go through the boring part first. You know, everything is time-stamped below. So if you don't care about the injury report, then you could skip past the injury report. But let me pull it up real fast because I just feel like it's part of the procedure as to go through the injury report. So for the Colts, Juju Brents is not playing. We didn't expect him to play. Drew Ogletree, all the same. Grant Stewart, illness? I don't know what that means. We could use Grant Stewart after cutting Shaq Leonard. That's kind of an important piece, not one that ultimately I think changes whether or not we win the game, but he's a guy that would make an impact for us this week if he was out there. Ryan Kelly, concussion, out. Rodney Thomas looks like he's going to play with that knee injury. Again, all things considered, barring the injuries we already knew, pretty healthy week for the Indianapolis Colts. Now, you look at the Buccaneers. I could go through the whole list if I want. I'm going to give you what's important. Lavonte David is out. He's been a stud linebacker for this team for years. That's an important piece for them to be missing on defense. Jamil Dean at corner is a very important part of the operation in Tampa Bay. For us, that's a good player to have out. Devin White has a foot injury, did not practice twice, was able to log a limited practice on Friday. We're going to see whether he's in or out. Obviously, an incredibly important piece. Carlton Davis looks like he's going to play, another important piece at corner for them. And other than that, it's really not much of anything. We assume Chris Godwin is going to play. It looks like they're just doing a little veteran maintenance on him, limited throughout the week. I'm sure he'll be good to go. So the important injuries for the Bucs, Lavonte David, Jamil Dean, potentially Devin White and Carlton Davis, but really, I think it's just going to be Lavonte David and Jamil Dean out, meaning that both teams are about as healthy as they have to be coming into this game. And now for the more interesting part, let's talk about each side of the ball for the Indianapolis Colts and kind of what we should be looking at heading into this game. I'm going to start with the offense because for me, which is funny because in the age of fantasy football, it's all about the offense. It's all about the numbers. And when you have a coach like Shane Steichen, it's all about the offense. It's all about the numbers and the scoring, right? But for me, the offense is just not as interesting to talk about on this given week as the defense, right? I mean, the formula, and really any week, the formula for the Colts offense is always the same right now, right? You have to run the ball effectively for 4 quarters and keep it clean in the turnover department. If the Colts do both of those things, they're going to score 3+ touchdowns, plus whatever field goals come from it. And obviously, field goal range is a pretty large part of the field when you have a guy like Matt Gay. So, I mean, if you're scoring 24, 27, 30 points in a game, I mean, you're going to win a lot of games. Pro Football Focus has the Colts as a top 3 offensive line in football as it currently stands. Running the ball should not be an issue for this team, period. They have to figure that out over the course of a game. I feel like there's moments where they look great on the ground and moments where it kind of just disappears. You got to put it together for an entire 4 quarters if you're going to make a legitimate playoff push this year. So things I'm looking for specifically on the offensive side of the ball. With number 1, can the Colts or will the Colts make an effort to get Zach Moss involved in this one? Because last time we played, it was against the Patriots. What did he have? 9 snaps, not touches, 9 snaps throughout that entire game. With how effective he had been at the start of the season, I know JT got paid, and I know he's our guy. It's unacceptable for Zach Moss to have that few carries. If you ask me, the Colts should actually be on some levels, at least in terms of the ratio of run to pass, going back to doing what they were doing with Carson Wentz, right? I mean, there was games that the Colts won where Carson Wentz threw the ball less than 25 times. The Colts should throw the ball less than 25 times as much as humanly possible. These running backs should be getting it nonstop. With that, Gardner Minshew gets blitzed. This is number 2, I guess, if we're counting numbers, right? Gardner Minshew gets blitzed more than anyone else in football at the quarterback position. And that's mostly due to the fact that 1, he's a smaller guy and he's antsy in the pocket. And 2, he's been prone to mistakes, right? So how can the Colts neutralize the Bucs from, or I guess really stop the Bucs from blitzing at will outside of just throwing screens, right? We've seen the screen to Michael Pittman be very, very effective for the Indianapolis Colts. I expect a fine dose of that play throughout the course of this game as well. But this right here is why Shane Steichen gets the big bucks, because I don't fully know the answer. This is where my knowledge ends. What can you do other than screens to stop the team from just blitzing whenever they want, right? How can we get the play action involved, right? The quick passing game. How can we take advantage of a Todd Bowles defense that is already aggressive by nature? And then you couple that with the fact that the scouting report on the Colts is to pressure Gardner Minshew as much as possible. Now, I expect part of the way they neutralize it to be number 3. How will Josh Downs look off of this bye week? Presumably, he's going to be effective in the snaps he's given. The question is, how many snaps will that be? He was not on the injury report. I assume it's going to be all of them, but is there anything lingering? Is there anything that they want to be careful about? I don't know. But if he is playing and he's a full go, nonstop, 100% of the snaps, 80% of the snaps, whatever he normally plays, if he does that, I think with this aggressive defense, with him running some of these quick little misdirections out of the slot, he is going to be an important piece of what the Colts are trying to do offensively against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So that right there is kind of all I have for the offense. The defensive side of the ball is what I view as the most interesting part of this game. There's just far more to talk about, right? Because the Buccaneers are a very, very talented group on offense. These past 2 games we had, when we went from 3-5 to 5-5, listen, that's great, right? You don't argue with winning, and ultimately a good team is going to beat the teams they should beat. That's what the Colts did. We beat the Panthers and we beat the Patriots these last 2 weeks. We were supposed to beat them. We did beat them, but we can only hope that with those 2 offenses, that between those 2 games and the bye week, that the Colts don't come out flat on defense this week, because the receiving cores are just night and day between the Bucs and those other 2 teams, right? This Bucs passing offense is, as I record this today, number 7 in the league in passing and number 4 in yards per attempt. Now, as a football fan and someone who's trying to get smarter, what should that tell you right there? I'm sure some of you already know. I'm not trying to condescend, but for the kids, I'm trying to teach you something. That yards per attempt number right there, that 4th in yards per attempt, should tell you that the Bucs are trying to get the ball down the field. They're trying to create explosive plays down the field to those playmakers, and they're going to do it if you allow them to do it, right? I was actually shocked to see that the Bucs were 4-6, because I really thought they've been formidable throughout much of the year, right? Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are absolute game breakers, the type of game breakers at receiver that the Colts have not versed in quite a while, and both of them can line up at any position. X on the outside, Y on the outside, inside the slot. These 2 guys can do it all. So as to where they're lined up, obviously, we have to be confident in Kenny Moore when each of these guys is coming out of the slot, right? Chris Godwin, we expect to be there a little bit more than Mike Evans. Kenny Moore right now has the lowest passer rating allowed of any slot corner in the entire NFL. He's having an absolute Pro Bowl, all-pro type of season out of the slot. We got to be confident in Kenny Moore. Now, with that, ultimately, when guys are as good as Chris Godwin and as Mike Evans, I want to make sure you guys understand this. They're going to beat you either way. It doesn't really matter how good you are. These guys are going to beat you from time to time. There's no shame in that if you're Kenny Moore. We can't just pile it on Kenny Moore if he gets beat by these guys on a couple of occasions, right? It's just a matter of when you let them beat you and how bad they beat you. That's really what's important when we're looking at this matchup with Kenny Moore on either of these guys. We're going to judge Kenny Moore against these guys with our eyes and our brains. That's what we do on this channel. We're not going to do it with our emotion. The real thing to be watching for in the secondary are Jalen Jones and Darrell Baker Jr., because I'll tell you what, right now, good luck, gentlemen. You absolutely have your work cut out for you against these 2 guys. Again, number 4 in yards per attempt are these Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're not trying to dink and dunk. They're trying to push this thing down the field. And the presence of Kenny Moore, as we've highlighted, is going to make it even easier of a decision for the Buccaneers to make as to not try some of these quick little routes. They're going to try to go away from Kenny Moore, and they're going to try to go outside to these corners, presumably, right? That's just what makes sense, X's and O's. If you break it down any other way, you're not making any sense. You want to get the ball down the field against guys like Jalen Jones and Darrell Baker Jr. if you're the Buccaneers, and they have their work cut out for them. For me, as corners, listen, they're going to get beat. It's not going to be an easy day, right? They just have to do good enough. They just have to stick around long enough on these guys to help out their safeties as to not just let them get free, over the top, open space, completely uncontested. The corners just have to give them enough of a fight for the safeties in Blackman and Rodney Thomas to do what they've been doing, which is playing very, very well this season. And from there, it's all about trying to find a way to get to Baker Mayfield, because Baker, who I like, actually wanted us to have him as opposed to Matt Ryan going into last season. Baker can be had, right? And as you push the ball down the field, it does become a game of risk and reward, right? Because, it's a big play, and obviously you're looking for a home run. But with that, it's possibly you get picked, right? You might be forcing some things. Can we force Baker Mayfield to make a mistake? Now, I think we can. Baker can be rattled, but how do we make that happen? I know the easy answer, particularly to all of you who hate Gus Bradley and the way he goes about things, is to just blitz the living hell out of him. Now, for me, I would advise against it, right? Because Rachaad White is a guy that you cannot forget about on this team. He is being used in this offense in a way that I think the Colts would regret blitzing just hastily, right? Because they're running a lot of swing passes, a lot of screens to this guy, Rachaad White. And I just think we got to rely on our dudes up front this year. With the nickel that we run so often in this Gus Bradley defense, you have 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. So in theory, there shouldn't be all that many situations where you have a mismatch athletically on the outside at wide receiver, right? You should not have linebackers on receivers basically at any point during this game. So that's going to leave those linebackers relegated to guys like Rachaad White and Chase Edmonds out of the backfield, and those tight ends when they find their way out in these intermediate routes, right? EJ Speed this week is a full go without Shaq Leonard. He's the reason they were so confident in letting Shaq go and not letting him finish out the season, in my estimation. Everyone talks about the trenches up front and the offensive and defensive line. The Indianapolis Colts have the trenches on the linebackers, right? Zaire Franklin, EJ Speed. If you have not watched The Trenches, what are you doing? You have to go watch their show. It is so good. But regardless of that, forget that, I digress. EJ Speed is rated right now as one of the best pass coverage linebackers in the game of football. If you've been watching with your eyes, you've seen that. I saw it all the way back in training camp. EJ Speed is really spectacular, like unbelievable in pass coverage. I'm looking for him to play a huge role in slowing down Rachaad White, or rather, we need him to. We need him to play a big role, right? We already know what Zaire Franklin brings to the table as a tackler when guys are in front of him and when he is out in space. The only flaw that I have seen in Zaire Franklin's game is that from time to time he can be had in pass coverage. So the Colts are going to have to be creative as to how they make sure EJ Speed is covering Rachaad White. Because if I'm the Bucs, I'm trying to get Rachaad White out of the backfield, particularly when I know how strong the Colts defensive line has been at getting a pass rush this year. I know we just talked about going down the field, but Rachaad White is one of these guys that the Colts cannot forget about, period. They have to figure out how to stop him from creating big plays off of 2-yard dump downs. They just have to do it. Kenny Moore, I'm sure, is a guy that we can expect to have some good plays against the run, and that's all good and well. But everyone talks about these wide receivers in Tampa Bay. I even spoke about how they want to get the ball down the field. This kid, Rachaad White, is the real deal. This is a special guy they have at running back, and he's going to hurt the Colts bad if they don't show him the respect he deserves. So I'm curious to see what their game plan is to slowing him down, and we're just going to go from there. It's going to be a fun matchup on defense. We're going to learn a lot about our defense in this game, if you ask me. So if I'm to sum up the defensive side of the ball in like 3 keys to a great defensive performance against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this is what I would say. We have to swarm the ball. We have to gang tackle. Again, they're going to try to get Rachaad White out in space. If he catches it, we need all 11 guys on defense attacking him the second they see he has the ball. This guy is a slippery and elusive runner. If you can't tell, I'm extremely worried about what he brings to the table. Number 2, the Colts have to force some turnovers in this game, whether it's interceptions, strip sacks, which we've done a great job of doing this year. Whatever it may be, we got to make something happen. I think we're going to force at least 1 turnover if my third key to a great defensive performance happens, is that we generate a 4-man pass rush and don't allow the deep ball. Now, these things kind of work hand in hand, right? Because if we get the pass rush going, ultimately the Buccaneers aren't going to have time to let these plays down the field develop, and then the possibility of Baker forcing one down the field when he does have a little bit of time raises exponentially, right? It kind of turns into one of those situations where you got to take the shots when you can have them type of approach. And hopefully in that, we can force him to make a hasty decision, which he can do from time to time. I like Baker, but again, he can be had. So that right there is my Colts versus Bucs preview. Of course, from a Colts perspective, if you're a Bucs fan, welcome. I hope you enjoyed it. Did I give you a proper evaluation of your team and how they might try to beat the Colts? And as a Colts fan, what do you think? Let me know what you think of this game. How are you feeling? It's a huge game for the Indianapolis Colts, an opportunity to go 6-5, alive and well in the playoff picture. It's finally back. Could not be any more excited about this game. Hopefully these boys don't let us down, right? So until next time, you'll probably see me Monday morning talking about the game in review. I'll be celebrating or I'll be very, very sad. We'll find out when the time comes. But until then, my name is Justin. This right here is the Ride on the Bench Colts cast. And as always, go Colts.